Okay, so it is 5:30, so we will get started here. Welcome, everyone. This is the Budgeting 101 for International Students presentation. My name is Spencer, and I work in the Awards and Financial Aid Office, and I'm thrilled to be partnering with the International Student Services Office to be bringing you this presentation. A little bit about me. I have been working at Carleton for about 4 months now, and before that, I worked for 3 years at a financial institution. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The event will be recorded and made available on our website later. So if you do want to go ahead and rewatch, it'll just take a couple of days for us to edit it up a little bit and get that posted. We do ask that you stay on mute just to cut down on some of the background noise for everyone. We have some time available at the end of the presentation for questions, so you'll be able to ask away at that time. But also feel free to type your question in the chat as well. We'll make sure to bring that question up later on. But I also have Neve and Caillou from the International Student Services Office, and they might be able to answer your question directly in the chat as well. And finally, a copy of these slides will be made available after the presentation. So you'll be able to email myself and get a copy of the slides. We do have quite a few links on here to specific articles, specific websites. So rather than having to copy all of them down, you can just let us know and we can get a copy of that sent to you. So a little bit on the agenda for today, we'll talk about why a budget is important, what you'll need to get started on the budget. I'll be talking a little bit about resources and expenses as well, and specifically some resources that might be useful for international students, so like some employment and scholarship options. I'll be doing a step-by-step guide on how exactly to create a budget, and then some ideas on how to maintain your budget once you've got that created. And at the end, we just have some money-saving tips just specifically for students to kind of round off the presentation. So first things first, what exactly is a budget? You might have heard all these, fancy examples of what a budget is, but really simply a budget is just a spending plan that's based on your income and your expenses. So it's really to map out the amount of money that you're receiving versus the amount of money that you're spending. And the reason that we budget is really just to reduce stress. I mean, you're here to focus on your studies. The last thing you really want to worry about when you're studying is running out of money. So a budget helps determine how you're going to stretch that money out over the entire year and to know how much money you can spend and at what time. And it also helps to minimize student debt upon graduation. School is expensive, so if you can kind of minimize as much debt as possible, you'll be in a great place once you're done school. So what do you really need to start making a budget? It's pretty simple. The overarching kind of ideas, you really are just looking at your expenses and your sources of funding. So expenses being kind of your costs, what you spend your money on, and your sources of funding being the money that you receive, right? The money that you're getting. So we'll start off just by taking a look at the approximate cost of a post-secondary education as an international student. So here's a snapshot of some of the costs that are associated with getting your degree. There's quite a wide range depending on what program you're in, whether you're living on residence or off residence. But you can see overall that the cost for just one academic year, counting tuition, fees, living expenses, books, supplies, that kind of thing, will most likely be in around the $39,000 to $57,000 range. And again, that's just for 1 year. And that's not even counting some other common expenses, groceries, cell phones, entertainment, transportation, healthcare, personal care products. It's important to remember that expenses aren't just the big things. We tend to think of expenses as these major purchases, but that's not the case. It could be your cup of coffee that you buy. It could be going out to a restaurant and getting some food. It's important to know that those little things do add up, and it is important to account for that in our budget. But what are some of the sources of funding? So the sources of funding can include things like employment. If you have a part-time job, it can include scholarships, savings, family contributions, loans, financial aid from a bank or a government. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time tonight, because as a student, you really want to be able to maximize the amount of funding that you're going to receive, especially if those are available to you. So starting off a little bit about employment, there are some specific criteria as an international student that you'll have to meet if you want to be able to work in Canada. So you do have to have a study permit, and that permit must also have a sentence that begins with the words may work or may accept employment. So if you're not sure, you might want to just give that a read to look for those key phrases, may work or may accept employment. You must also have full-time student status. So there are a few exceptions to this, one being like if you're doing a part-time study in the summer, or if you're doing a part-time as kind of a final term before you complete your degree program. But other than that, you do need to be considered a full-time student. And you must also have a social insurance number, which is a 9-digit number that allows someone to work in Canada. If you have all these things, then you can kind of move on to the next step, which is deciding whether to work on or off campus. So on-campus work, kind of like what the name suggests, means that you're working physically on campus or that you're working remotely for an employer who is physically located on the Carleton campus. And if you are working on campus, then you can work any amount that is authorized for full-time students. Off campus, it gets just a little bit trickier. It requires a couple other criteria. So you must also be in a program that's at least 6 months long that you'll earn like a degree, diploma, or certificate in. And also off-campus work is limited to just 20 hours per week. Now you are allowed to work more during these school breaks. So that would be like summer, for example, as long as you're a full-time student before the break and you're going to continue to be a full-time student after the break. So it is a lot of information to kind of throw at you, and it can be a little bit tricky, but one of the things that I would recommend looking at if you're really interested in pursuing this option, there is a workshop on January 17th put on by Carleton Career Services. It's called Navigating the Canadian Workplace. It covers things like job search support, networking events. And if you're interested, you can find that on the link. Again, these slides will be available, or you can visit carleton.ca/career. They do have it right on the homepage. You'll be able to get more information that way. Moving on from employment, Carleton scholarships are another source of funding that you might be able to look into. Carleton offers a variety of scholarships, from entrance to departmental to in-course, basically looking to maintain a strong academic grade during your time at Carleton. And for most of these, you're automatically considered for these scholarships, right? The entrance scholarships or the in-course scholarships. We have a section on the awards website, so carleton.ca/awards, that covers scholarships for international students. I would highly recommend checking that out because it can have some specific scholarships depending on what you're looking for in your program. And there's also a scholarship list which goes over all of the scholarships that we offer. So if that is an avenue that you're interested in exploring, again, I would recommend going to carleton.ca/awards and looking at that scholarship list because you can find some good information and research that way as well. But just like scholarship, or just like Carleton has some scholarships, there are external scholarships as well that you might be able to apply for. This is a lot of information, and I'm not going to cover each one individually, but it just goes to show the scope of what's available out there if you're able to do a little bit of research on it, right? There are a lot of scholarships that are available to students. Each external scholarship will most likely require a separate application. So you would have to go through those. But again, they are available if that's something that you're looking to do and something that you're looking to pursue. Carleton also offers aid for students with financial needs. So there are a couple options for those students that are looking for aid based on that. So Carleton offers like work studies, which allow you to earn extra money through work experience. There are bursaries that Carleton offers as well, which are sort of like scholarships, but rather than granting them based on academic achievement, they're granted based on financial need. So you can learn more about both of these on the awards website. Again, I highly recommend that you do check out that website because there's some good information on there. But one really important thing to note is that international students in their first year of study are not eligible for either one of these. So this is for if you're in your second year or later, that these then become options. But there are, just like scholarships, external options as well, if you're looking for this kind of financial aid. Because financial aid for international students is pretty limited in Canada, try searching for it in your home country first. So check in with your country's Department or Ministry of Education. And if that's not an option, then I would suggest broadening your search to include Canadian governments and organizations, just because it can be a little bit tricky for international specific financial aid. And when you are applying for financial aid or scholarships or anything like that, make sure you apply early, because you'll most likely need to collect supporting documents and write personal essays. And keep in mind that late or incomplete applications are typically not considered. And some of these external scholarships even require that host institutions apply on your behalf. So if this is the case, let your professors or your student advisor know that you're interested. Let them know what the specific scholarship is and how they can help prepare and submit your application on your behalf. Now, I do want to cover a little bit about scams as well, just because whenever it comes to funding, right? So scholarships, bursaries, there are people out there, unfortunately, that do try and take advantage of students. So I do want to look at a few of the most common scams and how to protect yourself. So first, we'll take a look at the common scholarship scams. So real scholarship opportunities will never ask for an application fee. They will never say that you're guaranteed to get money. That's a pretty big red flag. And also, if they use words like national or official, then they might be trying to cover up the fact that it's a scam. If it looks like kind of a sketchy website, right? Like doesn't look like an official website, and yet they're using all this language, official scholarship where you're guaranteed money, then that could be an indication that this could be a scam. You can always protect yourself by asking, does this seem too good to be true? If it seems too good to be true, chances are it is too good to be true. And again, a scholarship program will never ask you to pay money or provide your financial information up front. Just make sure that you do your research. And if anything looks suspicious, or even if you just want someone to look over it with you, if you're not sure, you're thinking, hey, I'm not sure if this is a scam, please contact the ISSO, because they'll be able to help go through it with you. And it's better to be on the cautious side. It's better to be cautious and have someone else review it with you and then say, no, it isn't a scam, or yes, it is, just to make sure that you're protected. Job scams are another type that can be fairly common. Most of the indicators are the same as for the scholarships, insofar as you're offered a job right on the spot, or you need to give them money through a wire transfer, you need to cash a check for them, send them an e-transfer. And if you're ever contacted by a non-business email, that's another red flag, because if it is a legitimate business, then they will have their own email. A really good post, if you're interested in learning more, is on the Carleton Career Services website, carleton.ca/career. And you can see right there, is this job a scam or is it too good to be true? They have lots of tips on how to spot these kind of scams if you're ever worried that the job that you're applying for seems a little bit weird. And finally, you might get a call from someone claiming to be from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, or the IRCC. You might have someone calling saying they're from the CRA, or Canada Revenue Agency, and they'll say all these things like you'll get deported if you don't pay them money. You have to owe them and pay them in prepaid credit cards or gift cards. These agencies will never contact you in person, online, or by telephone to threaten deportation unless you provide the money. Again, if you're ever concerned, if you ever have doubts, feel free to reach out to the ISSO and they'll be able to help, because they do see all these scams kind of have common themes, right? And they have been trained to kind of see what the red flags are, right? So just to kind of recap what we talked about here, it's best to start searching for financial aid in your country of citizenship first. That's where you first want to look. Then after that, that's when you'll want to broaden the scope and include Canadian scholarships and grants, especially ones from your university, so that being Carleton. If you do still need additional funding, you might need to rely on government loans or a loan from a financial institution. But just remember that these loans will need to be repaid, and there's interest payments on top of that. You want to start looking for financial aid early and be patient, because it is a long process, but there is funding out there if you take your time and do the research and go look for it. But just know that, you know, if you're looking to cover school expenses, you and your family will be primarily responsible for covering most of the expenses that you have through school. So with that in mind, we kind of know a little bit about what our expenses are, right? Our big items, rent, tuition, smaller things, cell phone, groceries, and we know what our possible resources are as well in terms of money coming in. So the next step that we want to do is to actually prepare the budget. So there is an 8-step kind of budgeting plan that when I worked in the financial institution industry, we would suggest to everybody. It didn't matter if you were young, old, student, retired, this was the plan to how to actually do a budget. It involves, you know, kind of prepping. It involves calculating your income and expenses, adding a little bit to savings, and then seeing if there are adjustments that need to be made. So the first step is make it fun. And I know this may seem like a bit of an odd one, especially when it comes to budgeting, because you might be thinking, Spencer, numbers aren't fun, especially when it comes to money and how I might need to restrict what I'm spending. That's why I say make it fun. And that's why I consider this one of, if not the most important step, because half the battle with a budget is actually sitting down and starting it. So the first thing that you want to do is set a date. And I say write it down somewhere, you know, block some time off in a calendar, set an alarm with a specific message, start budgeting, write it down on a piece of paper. You know, this will help you actually commit to a specific date, and then do stuff to try and make it fun. So I personally get my favorite meal, right? I order in a pizza and I play my favorite music, 90s hip hop, and then I get to work. And I find if you can make the atmosphere a little bit more fun, if you can make almost an event out of it, then it's so much easier to get started, and you're so much more willing to actually do it and keep going with it than if you're just sitting down and staring at an empty template thinking, I hate this. So that's the first step, is you kind of want to make it a little bit fun. The next step is to actually find a budget template. This can be as simple as a pencil and paper. That's my personal favorite because I like to actually write things down. You can use the budget calculator on the Carleton Awards website, which is a very good one because you can separate it into terms. So if you're only here for the winter term, if you're here for a full study term or the full 12 months of the year, then you can kind of tailor it to how long you'll actually need to stretch those funds out for. But there are plenty of online templates as well. You can Google online budgeting template. Excel has budgeting templates that you can use as well. So just find one that is most comfortable for you. The next step, so you're sitting down in your fun environment, you have your template. The next step is to start with calculating your income. And as a student, there are kind of two main categories for how your income will be coming in. One is being lump sum deposits, so like scholarships, bursaries, aid, personal savings. This is when you get one big deposit all at once. The other one that you could also get are recurring deposits. So if you have a part-time job, if you're part of the work study, you get paid every 2 weeks. It's not as big a contribution as, getting, a big lump sum, but it's money that's coming in every few weeks, and it can really help. So when you mark down your lump sum deposits, you're going to want to divide this by the number of months you're studying. So normally it's an 8-month study period. So once you pay the tuition, you're going to want to divide that by 8 because you need to stretch it out and see what you can spend per month. When it comes to recurring deposits, if you have a job where your hours vary, right? If you work 10 hours one week, 12 the next, 15 the next, then you're going to want to use the minimum amount of work hours. That way, it's better to be conservative and have extra money at the end of the day than think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to cut somewhere in my budget because my hours aren't what I'm expecting. So once you've marked down your income, you're going to want to move on to fixed expenses. Fixed expenses are costs that do not change from month to month. So this is stuff like your rent, your internet, cell phone plan, streaming service, your insurance. The cost is the same from month to month. Once you've marked that down, you move on to variable expenses. So ones that do change from month to month. This is more of the fun things, right? Dining out, entertainment, purchasing clothes, buying groceries, personal care products. These are all things where the amount isn't necessarily always the same, right? You might eat out more one month than another. So it all depends. And when you're filling this out, you really want to use your best estimate. So it's not important that, you have it perfect the first time. When I first started a budget, I had no clue how much I spent on restaurants, right? But if you're true and you think, okay, I go out, a certain amount per week, then you can have a rough estimate when you're filling out these categories. And I always recommend matching them up to what you really value. So if you really enjoy going to the restaurant with friends and you enjoy that more than, let's say, purchasing new clothes, then maybe put more money aside for those restaurant trips and less money aside for the clothing, because you get more value, more fun out of the restaurant. So that's something I try and say as well, is just match up what you value with these categories. Next step that you're going to want to do is savings. So I know that savings might not seem that important as a student. Again, money is tight when you're a student, so it can be a little bit tricky. But it's important to get into the habit of saving early. You never know when an emergency is going to pop up. If you want to do traveling, right? That all costs money. And if you can minimize the amount of debt that you're in at the end of the year by saving up money for this, then you'll be in an amazing spot when you graduate. And even if it's something small, even if it's $5, $10 a month, just start with something, because it's important to get into that habit of setting money aside and not spending all the money that you have. And one thing that you can do that I suggest is to set up automatic transfers from your checking to your savings account each month. So you don't have to log in and manually move money over. It automatically does it for you. So now you have your template, you have this income that's marked down, you have these expenses that are marked down, you have a little bit set aside to savings. What I recommend is setting aside just an extra $50 on random purchases. I say it's just an extra pinch of money. And this is for random stuff that comes up, because I don't know about you, but for me, random stuff always comes up, whether it's buying winter boots that I didn't think I needed, or needing to buy a textbook for class, right, that I forgot about. These weird things keep coming up, and you think, oh, I should have thought of that, but I didn't, or, oh, I wasn't expecting that. So it's nice to have this extra little bit of money set aside so that you don't have to worry about whether or not you have to purchase it, because this money is set aside for this. So once you have all that, you have your income, your expenses, your savings, you take the income, you subtract the expenses, you subtract the savings, and you're left with either a surplus or a deficit. A surplus, meaning that you have a positive number, or zero, means you did a great job. You have a little bit of extra money, a little bit of extra wiggle room, and you can put that towards whatever you want. You can put that towards extra savings if you're saving up for something expensive. It means you can maybe put it towards entertainment, watch a few more movies in the month than you thought originally possible. If you have a deficit or a negative number, that's okay. That's why we do the budget, and that's why it's better to figure that out now than it is later on, and dealing with that stress of realizing, oh my goodness, I'm really going to have to drastically cut back what I'm spending. Budgeting is all a balancing act, right? So if you are in a deficit, as a student, it is easier to cut down on your spending rather than find more sources of funding. So I will say, if you do have a deficit, I would recommend looking at cutting down a little bit of spending first, because that's much easier than trying to maybe get more hours at work, especially as a student, or looking for extra scholarships. It's a lot easier to just cut down a little bit than it is to increase that funding. But now that you have your budget, it's important to maintain it, right? So it's kind of an ever-evolving process. So some tips that I like to follow to help maintain my budget is to track my spending. So you would be surprised at how much less money you'll spend if you start just writing down your purchases. Anytime you grab a $2 coffee, anytime you go for dinner, anytime you buy a bottle of shampoo, write it down. I spent this much on coffee. I spent this much on the shampoo, right? Again, you can either use pen and paper. That's what I do. You can use an app like Mint, which automatically categorizes your purchases for you into different categories. And that way, at the end of the month, you can see where you're spending your money and if it matches what you had originally set aside in your budget. And as you start to track it, you kind of start to realize, hey, maybe I'm spending more or less money than I thought on certain items. And then you can kind of ask yourself, well, do I really want to spend this much money? And then you can kind of adjust your budget depending on how you want to spend it. So one of the things that I noticed when I first started kind of tracking is I do not like the Uber Eats app anymore, because I actually started tracking how much I spent in a month. And for 10 meals, it was like $430, which is basically $14 a day for 10 meals. And I realized I'd much rather spend money on things like going out with my friends for dinner rather than, just ordering something in for myself, or saving up and using that money, to travel to go see friends, the friends that I have around the world. So even though I use it once in a while, I'm much more mindful of when I use it. And I think that's what's important. The point isn't to beat yourself up that you spent, maybe more than you were thinking. The point is to go, okay, does this match up with what I want to do? Does this match up with what brings me joy, like a Marie Kondo? Does this bring me joy? And if not, rearrange your budget, right? Again, you don't have to cut it out completely, but you do want to make sure that you're still following along with your budget. And another thing is, you don't want your needs to turn into your wants. Things like food, things like shelter, adequate winter clothing, right? These are all things that you don't want to sacrifice. So this is where it's important, where if you are on your budget and you are looking at cutting some spending, it is important that you have your needs first and then move in to your wants, right? Another thing that can be a little bit tricky is impulse spending. So this is when we go and we buy something that we didn't actually mean to buy in the first place, right? And even though these might be small purchases, they add up over the month when we keep doing them. So when you're going grocery shopping, just make sure that you have a list of exactly what you want, and try and avoid getting the other items, right? The other items that kind of just hop into your cart magically. If you're thinking of purchasing something expensive, I'd recommend waiting just 24 hours before making the purchase, right? If you still really want it after 24 hours, then you can always go back and get it. But you might find that, I didn't actually want it that badly. I was just, reacting on emotion. And that's something that's important too, is to identify triggers that lead you to overspending. For me, it was saving my credit card information on my web browser, because then it's really easy to go online shopping and it doesn't feel like you're spending that much money, because you don't even have to put in your credit card information. So it's important to identify stuff like that. just so that you don't accidentally overspend or overspend on something that you don't necessarily want or need. And if you want to go really hardcore, then I recommend bringing cash, right? Because if, let's say, you're going to the mall, you literally cannot spend more than the cash that you have on hand. So if you bring $50 and you don't bring anything else, you're not spending more than $50. And although it's drastic, it is a good way to maintain and stay on budget. And one of the things too that helps us with our impulse spending, and it is a good way to save money as well, is to set goals for our savings account, right? So if you are interested in taking a trip, let's say, and that's going to be $500, and you calculate, okay, it's going to be 8 months until, I want to take this trip, then you go 500 divided by 8, and I have to put away $62.50 per month to get where I want to go in that amount of time. And that can kind of help, when you have a goal, it's a lot easier to save money than to say, well, I'm just saving it for a hypothetical emergency, right? Or, oh, I'm saving it because maybe I'll use it later on. This way, it's a lot easier to save that money. And it can also help curb that impulse spending, because you might think, although I want this now, that might be a problem when it comes to me wanting to travel later, let's say. I do also want to talk a little bit about credit cards, because credit cards are everywhere nowadays. A credit card is issued by a financial company that allows you to make purchases by borrowing money on the credit card and paying it back later. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's really important. And if you take one thing away from this, it's going to be this. On a credit card, you are borrowing money and paying it back later, right? So if I make a purchase on a credit card, let's say I put a $50 purchase on a credit card, I still need to go into my bank account and pay that credit card off. So that's where I like to make that distinction. You're borrowing money until you go and pay off that bill. There are two major credit card companies in Canada, those being Visa and MasterCard. And each credit card comes with a credit limit, which is the maximum amount that you can spend on your credit card before paying it off. And for students, that's usually in between $500 and $1,000. So some tips on using your credit card. You want to pay your credit card in full every month. You only have to pay the minimum payment. But if you do that, the interest will start to accumulate. And this isn't small interest we're talking about. This is like 20% interest that gets accumulated. So if you maintain the minimum payment, you'll find that debt just keeps piling on and piling on and piling on. And soon you're accruing a lot in interest, not so much in the purchases. So pay your credit card in full every month and only spend on your credit card what you have in your bank account. You also don't need to sign up for every credit card. As a student, you really only need one. And at a maximum, I say at a maximum is 2, right? Because they're pretty much all the same. So you don't need to go around and have 5 credit cards. You really only need one. Maximum 2 is what I would say. And it's also important to know your credit limit on your credit card. Again, this is the maximum amount that you can spend, and you want to try not using or keeping your balance below 70% of that limit. So let's say your credit card has a limit of $1,000. You don't want to exceed $700 balance before you pay it off. And lastly, I do recommend, although it's boring, to read the terms of service and specifically the fee section on the credit cards, because there are lots of fees that people don't necessarily know about. There could be an annual fee on the credit card. There could be an over the limit fee if you do go over your credit limit. There could be a late fee if you don't make your payment on time. If you take money out of an ATM using your credit card, then there's lots of fees associated with that. So it's important that we understand what these fees are, really, so that we can avoid them. Right? The whole point is that we want to avoid all these fees. So if you don't know what they are, it's a little bit hard to avoid them. And so the last thing I wanted to kind of cover tonight is just a few little money saving tips that you can use as students. to kind of save a little bit of money here and there. These aren't going to be major savings, but all these little savings add up over time. Things like renting your textbook at the bookstore or buying used either at the bookstore or at Haven Books. You can save up to 50%, and the textbooks don't really change too much year over year as long as you confirm with your professor that you can still use a previous copy. Get involved in clubs, get involved with the free events on campus. There are lots of these events and clubs that are available for free. You can borrow books, board games, video games from the library. So it doesn't always necessarily have to cost you money to have a good time with your friends and to meet new people. And remember to bring your student card with you as well, because you never know which stores will actually offer you a discount as a student. And if they do, it's important that you show them that piece of ID. A little bit more as well, specifically for grocery stores, you can actually use a coupon app like Flip to look for good deals at different grocery stores, especially on stuff that you purchase frequently. And some grocery stores near campus will offer a discount day. So once a week, students can come and save around 10% on their purchase. Just note that you will have to show your student card, and you may need to sign up for the store's reward card. So let's say Loblaws, you might need to sign up for like a PC Optimum card as well, just to get this discount. Some stores also offer price match. So with price match, what that means is if you find an item that's cheaper at another store, and you can show that it's cheaper at another store, then where you're currently shopping will lower the price on their own product to match it. So you can actually save a decent amount of money that way without having to shop around at different stores. And again, I kind of reiterate here, track your spending, because it really does make a difference when you're writing down your purchases. I don't know the psychological aspect behind it, but I can tell you from experience that it works. There are also quite a few online budgeting resources as well that you might want to take a look at if you're interested. We talked about the Mint app, which again, if you're going to be using your phone to track expenses, I do highly recommend. There's the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, which is a really good kind of base knowledge that the government wants to put out. My Money Coach, Get Smarter About Money. There are a lot of online budgeting resources that are available to you. There's also career services and USC right here at Carleton that can provide some services as well. So career service is really good for networking events. What can you do with your degree? Job search support. USC offers food related support as well. So if you're going through, a bit of a tough time financially, they will help, provide that food for you. So we covered a lot tonight, and I do really appreciate everyone who took the time to come out. Wrapping it up a little bit early as well. If you want more help, feel free to reach out to either the awards office or the ISSO. If you want the slides, feel free to email myself, Spencer Hamilton, cunet.carleton.ca, and I'll be able to give you a copy. You should have my email in your contacts as well, because it's the same one that's you got the Zoom link from. So if you like, you can even reply to that email just saying, hey, I'd love a copy of the slides, and I can get those sent to you. I did cover a lot of information, and a lot of this information is also available on our website. So carleton.ca/awards, carleton.ca/ISSO. Both are great resources to kind of begin your research into a bunch of the different topics that we talked about tonight. Here is the contact information as well for the Awards and Financial Aid Office. We're located at 315 Robertson Hall. Do you have a phone number if you do want to talk a little bit more about that? Socials, we do have a Twitter account, CU Awards. The ISSO has one as well, SL Ravens. They also have an Instagram account at SL Ravens. So give them a quick follow, because there's some good tips and tricks for international students on both of these platforms that can help you along your journey at school. And finally, we do have one more virtual event in Financial Literacy Month. So if you are interested, Pamela will be speaking on next Thursday, November 25th, same time at 5:30, talking about women's financial empowerment. And she is a fantastic speaker. She's got some really amazing advice. So if you are interested in that, then feel free to register on our website, carleton.ca/awards. I really hope that everyone kind of can take something away from tonight. I hope that you all learned something from tonight. And I will open up the floor. What questions do you guys have? I can't see the chat, so maybe Neve, if you want, if there are questions in the chat, if you can just unmute and let me know, and I can get those answered. Or if someone has a question, again, feel free to either unmute or type in the chat, and we can get that answered up for you.
Thank you so much, Spencer. This has been truly so informative. I love this idea of making budgeting as fun as possible, and some of your own reflections on how to really save money in those small and big ways. We do have a couple of questions that are coming in. The first one is, can you explain savings accounts? What exactly are they?
Yes, that is a great question. So at every financial institution, they kind of offer two main accounts. So one is called a checking account. And that's one where you spend most of your money. So if you have a debit card that you use to make purchases, that's going to be attached to your checking account. So when you're spending money, that's checking. A savings account, specifically, I mean, it's right in the name kind of thing. So each institution will have a separate account called a savings account. So when you log into online banking, let's say, you have a checking and a savings, you'll see one that says, checking, and another one that says savings. And really, it's just a spot to put extra money into that's away from your spending, right? So you have your debit card where you're spending money out of, but if it's not attached to this separate savings account, then you know that money's not going to be touched, right? It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So I hope that answers the question on the difference between a checking and a savings account. But you can go to your financial institution and ask, what kind of savings accounts do you have? And they'll be able to set you up with one that works. And that way you can set money aside and not worry about spending it.
Thank you, Spencer. We have some really great other questions coming in, and we'll go through each of those. But just as a follow-up to this question we just received, I know interest rates are a consideration with bank accounts. Are there typically different amounts of savings or interest you get with a savings account versus a checking account?
Yes, a really good question. Yes, so a savings account, you typically get a higher interest rate on it. So you earn a little bit more money you earn a little bit more money on the funds that are in there. And that's because it's really meant to just put your money away and not touch. So the bank is almost rewarding you, right, for setting aside a little bit of money and not touching it by giving you a higher interest rate than your checking account. So a checking account typically has an interest rate near 0%. It's a little bit, but it's not much. A savings account will typically be a little bit higher, not too much, maybe 1 or 2%, but you do earn a little bit more money on the savings account than you do if you just kept it in a checking.
Thank you. Our next question is, how can we check our credit score?
How can you check your credit score? Yes, there are a lot of apps that are around now that allow you to check your credit score. I believe the most popular one is Credit Karma. And what Credit Karma does is you put in your information and it will give you like an update on your credit score once a month. Without getting too technical, it doesn't hurt your credit score to do it. And I do always recommend that if that's something that you're interested in doing, is to check out those apps. So Credit Karma, I believe, is the biggest. and it allows you to get an updated credit score once per month.
Thank you. The next question is from Kosi, who would like to unmute to ask their question.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, thank you so much for the session. It's quite informative. So my question is just that, so now I'm looking at off-campus housing and have gone to a couple of viewings already. So for international students, they say ideally they need a cosign. So for those who don't, like, how does that work? Because if you're not looking at living in an RV building or anything like that for the other options that are not student living.
Right. So generally they require some kind of cosigner, and you're saying that you don't have one. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
because they also don't accept my parents because it's international. They would be outside of the country, so they don't accept that. So how does that work then?
Right. That is a bit of a tricky and unique situation. I think it might be helpful for you. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, unfortunately, but it might be helpful for you to contact the ISSO through email, and they might be able to help kind of set you up in the right direction on kind of where to start looking and where to go from there. Again, because it is a bit of a tricky situation, and just unfortunately, I'm not too sure the best way of kind of solving that. So I'm sorry that I wasn't able to really answer the question, but yeah, I believe if you contact the ISSO, they'll be able to kind of help point you in the right direction.
Thank you so much to everyone. That is the last question that I see at this time. We'll just maybe give it a few more moments in case there's any other additional questions that have come up. Nkosi's question is a great one. And certainly to reiterate what Spencer shared, feel free to reach out to the ISSO to discuss housing options. Just while we're waiting to see if any final questions come in, I will invite you to take a look at the chat. We have included a link to an evaluation for this workshop, which we hope you will fill out to help us improve the offerings that the ISSO provides to international students. So feel free to share with us about topics you're interested in. And I see Esme has raised their hand.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for the session. Sorry, I came in late, and but it's so far very helpful. I learned several apps and how to save money. I just have a quick question that is there any student loan options for international students too? I'm considering it, but not sure if like we will get to like a different interest rate, or if we will ever have access to it. So yeah, just I'm sorry if you already mentioned, I missed it, but thank you very much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good question. If you're looking for student loans, what I do recommend first is looking in your country of citizenship first. I know that when I worked at a financial institution, generally with student loans, we would require like a parent to be a co-signer, right? Just because a student doesn't necessarily have a lot of income. So I would recommend looking there first. And if not, that's when you might want to start looking at options in Canada. So either with the government of Canada or through like a financial institution here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Do we have any other questions coming through in the chat?
There have not been any additional questions coming through at this time.
Okay. Well, if anyone does have any more questions that you think about later on, again, feel free to reach out to either myself or the ISSO. We'll be more than happy to answer them, especially if you have specific questions as well that you don't really want to quite share in a group setting. Then we would be happy to take a look at that on an individual level as well. I want to thank everyone again for coming out. I really appreciate you giving me the time to share a little bit about international budgeting, and we hope to see you as well at the next one that we have too coming up next week. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time.